the mic. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, excellent. All right, thanks for coming, everybody. This is Surveillance Using Spare Stuff. My name is Matt Scheurer. I have a handle of Circa. If anybody wants to follow me or send me a tweet on Twitter, I think I've had this account for years and have officially 1 follower, so I would welcome more. The copy of the slides are out in SlideShare. And so I don't like talking about myself a whole lot, but probably like everybody in this room, I'm a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There's a number of them right there. So a quick disclaimer here, the information material presented is for educational purposes only. The presenter is not responsible for its use or misuse. No warranties or guarantees implied or otherwise are in effect. Use of these tools, techniques, and technologies are at your own risk. So bottom line is, if you do something silly like stalk somebody, violate somebody's privacy, steal usernames, passwords, pins, launch codes, don't blame me. I told you not to do it. I'm not a lawyer, but one thing I do understand is that surveillance laws vary very much from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, so please consult with an attorney familiar with the laws and ordinances in your area before conducting any surveillance activity. So how this all got started, really it was sort of a odd thing where I was looking at some of my old smartphones and thought, you know, I've got a few of these. They're not really doing anything. They're just sitting in a drawer collecting dust. There's got to be something I can do with them. So by a show of hands, anybody here have old smartphones they're not currently doing anything with? Hands all over the room. So I was one of those people. So I started looking into it. Decided the IP cameras sounded like a fun project. Since it was just spare equipment I already owned, there was a low cost, low barrier to entry. And so some reasons you might want to conduct surveillance would be to protect physical assets from threats such as dumpster diving, theft, vandalism, and destruction. You know, dumpster diving has been around for a long time, so you know, it would give you a means to sort of monitor what's happening around the dumpster out back. And also protect physical barriers or perimeters from threats such as lockpicking. There are a lot of things you can do with locks that you can get ones with tighter tolerances, more pins, offset pins, any number of things to sort of make it harder. But a determined, skilled lockpick still often get through. This just gives you a chance to sort of see and find out what's happening, and perhaps at least, if nothing else, have some evidence available. And then social engineering infiltration. If you find a weird device somehow connected to your network and you think, well, how did that get in this area? And maybe you remember that in your research and development environment, some guy wearing a suit that looked completely out of place was walking through, kicked over a trash can. You thought, well, that was kind of odd. So this will let you sort of have a chance to go back, look at your pictures, look at your video, and try to figure out what was happening there. And then simply trespassing, all things you can do with surveillance. The components of an effective surveillance system, in my mind, consist of centralized management. That's a way to manage multiple cameras in one centralized location. Monitoring and detection, obviously, is a very big key to sort of try to thwart things in progress. Collecting video or audio to sort of capture what was happening and when, very important. Alerting is also another key component to know when an area has been breached or something is happening. But you do want to try to minimize false alarms. It doesn't do you a lot of good if you're getting alerts every 2 minutes that, you know, a bird flew by. So you want to try to eliminate as much noise as possible so you're only getting alerted on actual critical events. And then finally, archival and retrieval, another important step to be able to have video to turn over to law enforcement as an example, if you were able to capture a crime as it had happened. We'll wrap back around to those in a moment, but we'll talk about some of the spare or low-cost equipment you can use in a surveillance system. Smartphones. Old smartphones are fantastic. What makes them great is a smartphone is essentially a pocket-sized computer. Really, a smartphone without active cellular service is very much like what an iPod Touch was a number of years ago. Generally speaking, people don't carry two devices because they have one smartphone that's their current one that generally does most everything they want already. But even older phones that were not high-end have pretty decent video quality to them. We're not trying to capture images and video that is, going to be your wedding album or your senior photos. We're just trying to get enough detail that we can clearly identify what was happening. And they've all got built-in microphones, which is great if you want to capture audio. And this is a key one. All smartphones have built-in Wi-Fi support. That makes them very easy to attach to your network to sort of centralize everything. And also they're very easy to power. Wall chargers are readily available. You can get external battery packs to give yourself extended run times. There are even cellular chargers that'll help keep a phone powered where you generally don't have power available. Depending on the phone, it might even be able to run off of USB extension. And then oftentimes they'll support extra storage, be it an SD card, or if you want to root or jailbreak your device, you can usually do USB to go or some other function to extend the internal storage capacity of a smartphone. And they're inconspicuous. They can be hidden in plain sight. And so if you walk into a room and you see a cell phone that's plugged into a wall, you're generally going to think, oh, well, somebody is just charging their phone. What you're probably not thinking is that, hey, this thing could be recording everything that's happening in this room and everything that's going on. So again, just hidden in plain sight. And then spare stuff item, old router. If you find yourself upgrading to an AC quality router, or maybe you want Google's new On Hub to sort of do some smart routing, a lot of times you can take these old routers and install a custom firmware such as DDWRT or Tomato on them. Also, the great thing about routers is that they are fantastic at basically routing traffic between two networks, so they lend themselves to network segmentation. Another spare stuff item is an old computer. And an old computer may be repurposed to run Linux with ZoneMinder, and we're going to touch on ZoneMinder quite a bit in this talk. The only real note here is that you might need a beefier system if you're monitoring a very large volume of cameras. This is kind of an optional item, certainly not required, but if you want to have sort of a night vision for pretty inexpensive, you can use an old reflector lamp. Or if you have an old trouble lamp in your workshop or garage, or even a floor lamp will do, you can fit these with an infrared light bulb. It's just a very inexpensive way to broadcast a large amount of IR into an area. One word of caution is the infrared light bulbs are generally used for heating lamp purposes, so they tend to run hot. So if you're using a lamp, probably want to make sure that the shade or the dome is metal or glass, or something that isn't flammable. You probably don't want to find yourself in a situation where, yeah, that building we wanted to protect is nice and protected and secure, but the problem is the lamp set the place on fire and it burned to the ground. Sort of defeats the purpose of protecting it. And other spare stuff items include old tablets and dedicated IP cameras. The nice thing with these tablets is it's just in some regards a larger smartphone. Typically you're going to find these things are more expensive if you want to buy one on the used market than say an old cell phone. But a lot of times you can find these things listed on deal sites, auction sites, and pick them up pretty inexpensively. Dedicated IP cameras are great. What makes them nice is they have built-in motion control, and a lot of times infrared built into them. It's a big plus. But there's no hard and fast rules on this. There's nothing that says you can't take your surveillance system consisting of 5 old smartphones, an old tablet, and 3 IP cameras. You can use any combination of devices you want. You can monitor them all. So you can mix and match this stuff very easily. Yes. Um, yeah, I personally sort of like the Foscam pictured here. I think that's the FW8910. But there's a number of good ones out there. These are just the ones I've worked with. They tend to get pretty good reviews. But generally, what I found is these things aren't generally too picky as long as you got a good quality picture and the features that you're looking for. Yes. Yeah, it's a good point. The better quality camera, the better quality image you're going to get. I think for surveillance systems, the quality is a little less critical as long as you're capturing the important detail. But certainly, there's nothing wrong with getting a better quality image. And the response times on these is generally pretty good. So some notes on night vision. Actually, every camera is pretty much capable of night vision, but infrared lighting alone isn't going to give your camera night vision capabilities. What you can do though, if you're advantageous and bold enough, is you can actually disassemble your camera, and usually around the lens you'll find an small IR filter, which is a film, plasticky film that typically is a dark red, blue, or purple. The issue you might run into when you remove an IR filter from a camera lens is that during bright light, even normal lighting, everything will tend to whitewash out on the image quality. One workaround you can do is these cameras are pretty cheap. These phones are pretty cheap. You can always have one with the IR filter removed and one without, and essentially put 2 different cameras in the same area. Just to sort of work around those issues. If you get a dedicated IP camera like the ones we've discussed, then that becomes sort of a non-issue since the infrared night vision is built into those devices. So using smartphones as IP cameras, there's a lot of free IP cam apps available in app stores. That will essentially turn your smartphone into a network IP camera. That's generally speaking. My advice is try all the free ones you want. You may like some, may not like others. You've got a minimal investment of just a little bit of time, sort of experimenting with them. You can also buy there's some low cost apps. You can read reviews to try to get an idea if that's going to meet all of your needs. So these provide a number of ways to manage a small number of IP cameras. There's also IP camera monitoring applications that tend to work well on phones and tablets. You can oftentimes find free or low-cost apps for that as well. But one thing I want to talk about a lot is ZoneMinder. If you've never used ZoneMinder, it's a great product. Essentially, it's a free video camera security app suite. It's designed for low-cost, do-it-yourself video security, including commercial or home, CCTV, theft prevention, child family monitoring, nanny cam applications. It supports capture, analysis, recording, and monitoring of video data coming from cameras attached to a Linux system. The nice thing is, we'll talk about the modes here in a moment, but it supports motion detection, emailed alerts, and remote viewing. All those features are supported. The one drawback with ZoneMinder is it doesn't have integrated audio recording built into the default application. It's a little bit of a drawback, and somebody here may have a better workaround for this. I found that a lot of the IP cam apps I've played around with will support streaming to VLC. One thing you can do with VLC players, you can dump that out to a WAV file and then later convert that WAV file into some compressed audio format. Why I think ZoneMinder is great is a lot of the camera modes. So you can go with none, which essentially just disables a camera from ZoneMinder. The monitor mode basically is a live streaming mode if you want to hop on, just see what's happening, but you don't want to record anything. Motion detection will capture still snapshots when a motion detection alarm from the camera goes off. Record mode essentially gives you a continuous video recording of a camera view. Motion recording, or MoCord, uses motion triggered events to begin recording. And then no detect is for external controlled triggers and actions. Haven't really played around with that too much. My understanding is you can sort of do some custom events to trigger camera actions. So the important thing to note is these settings only impact the camera in ZoneMinder. So for example, if you set a camera on none, it doesn't mean the camera's not actually still capturing the image of what's happening. It just simply means that the camera is not being displayed in ZoneMinder. So configuring email alerting, it's in the ZoneMinder console under options and email. One thing that might be helpful is to consider setting an email address to a distribution group. That includes your SMS numbers, so you can get text alerting when a motion alarm is set off. One of the big things with ZoneMinder, what I think really makes it great and sort of sets it apart from just sort of playing around with cameras natively, is it lets you define hot zones. And so one of the keys with using ZoneMinder successfully is the concept of zones. Zones are essentially an area within an image that you can define for the purposes of motion detection or even ignoring motion. That helps you minimize false alarms. And what I think is great about this is if you see the car, essentially this person has defined a hot zone that's only recording actions, motion detection actions within their hot zone. So for example, if something is happening out in the street, you're not capturing that information. It's only when somebody approaches the driveway or the vehicle within that defined hot zone that the recording begins. So some things that'll let you do is that will let you sort of define a zone around a door, for example. And so you're only capturing traffic when people come in or out of the door, but you're really, when that happens, you're capturing everything that happened in that room at that time. So if somebody is trying to pick a lock, for example, and they've got a buddy standing off to the side, sort of serving as their lookout, you're getting that whole view of the room captured, but it's triggered on the event that you want, so you're not just getting random passers-by, unless they happen to be walking in front of the door. It's very powerful to sort of help minimize those false positives and getting too many alerts for non-issues. Archiving and retrieval within ZoneMinder, the USR, share, ZoneMinder events and images folders are generally where the data is stored. One option you have is that you can use cloud storage synchronization like Dropbox, for example, or any of the other alternatives out there. And essentially you can synchronize those folders off-site for retrieval later. Could be important if your system that has all your recordings, something were to happen to it got destroyed. And then just some good practices in general for surveillance. The important thing, I think, when you have an IP camera is not putting it directly on the internet, lest your own security cameras be used against you. We talked about the FOSCAM systems, which I have. To be honest with you, I'm constantly getting firmware update email alerts. Security is sort of an afterthought on these devices, and so you don't want to sort of have a camera used against you. You might, for example, set up a home alarm system to monitor what's happening in your home. And if you bought that new 72-inch 4K Ultra TV that you have hanging on the wall, the last thing you want is for somebody else who also has access to your camera to know when you're not home, when they can come over and help themselves do it. So you don't want these things to be used against you. It's a very important point. I would recommend using VPN for remote camera monitoring. Sort of keeps it directly off the internet, gives you an extra added layer of security around that. And then generally follow good networking security practices, at least as much as you can, particularly if you're using cameras on a wireless network. Segment your IP cameras off from the rest of your network with appropriate access controls in place. The default passwords to most devices and apps are very well known, so by all means change the default logins, use strong passwords. That's just common sense, but very important. And also I would, in addition to keeping these off of your network, if you're doing SNMP monitoring, I would try to not use the same community strings that you use on your other network devices or systems. If one of these devices did get compromised, you don't want somebody else to sort of be able to tell instantly what else is going on in your network. And then patches and updates. So we talked a moment ago about sort of firmware updates and the importance of them because they come out quite frequently. So keep your camera firmware, phone firmware, software updated. Also, even the ZoneMinder essentially functions as an appliance. You want to remember it's running on a live Linux system. So keeping that host up to date with patches is incredibly critical. Because once that system's compromised, then everybody has access not just to your cameras, but your archives as well. So just always remember that. And that's really about all I have. A lot of people I want to thank for helping make this possible. And we're running short on time, but I have time for maybe a question or two if anybody has any. All right, well, I think that's it then. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference.